Welcome to the Music Journal podcast, where we talk about the hottest things happening in music right now, and also how you can apply it if you're an aspiring producer or musician yourself. I'm your host, Wes Yee. I'm a producer, artist, and educator, and I'm stoked to be chatting with you. Let's make history. Welcome to another episode of the Music Journal podcast. Today we have Kendra Comstock. She's an amazing classical singer, and I'm super stoked to have her on the show because if you've been listening for a little bit, you've probably heard that I've had a lot of producers and rappers, and I had Terrence Southern recently who had artificial intelligence produce her latest album. So it's cool to have a classical singer on the show, somebody who is a little more versed with older styles, and I would definitely consider her an expert on the topics. So Kendra, welcome to the Music Journal.
Thanks. I'm excited to be here.
So it's kind of funny because this is actually our second time recording because some technical difficulties, that being me just being a fucking idiot and accidentally deleting the files. So I appreciate you coming back. I know you had to travel pretty far, right?
Mm-hmm. Like all the way across the street.
Yeah, Kendra's a neighbor of mine, and you guys will get to know her as I have as well somewhat recently. Do you want to share a little bit more about yourself and let the listeners know a little more about what you do?
Sure. So I'm from Vermont originally. I went to Oklahoma City University. I studied voice. I graduated a couple of years ago, and I relocated to Boston. I have been singing probably for the past 10 years, taking voice lessons, doing competitions, all those sorts of things. And I sing mostly early music and classical music. And now I'm teaching, so it's a little bit weird to be on the other side of things. And I moved to Boston about a year ago to get more into the early music scene. So that's like me in a nutshell, I guess. I play a little bit of classical guitar. I recently started taking lute lessons. Fun fact. Really love buffalo chicken pizza.
Who doesn't, right?
Yeah, can't get enough. Yeah.
I feel like that's an Oklahoma thing too, the buffalo chicken.
It's not at all.
What?
Yeah.
What do they eat over there?
I don't know, unhealthy things. Fried chicken.
Buffalo
Chicken fried steak. Chicken fried steak. Yeah.
What is that again?
It is steak that is fried as if a chicken would be fried. So it has like the breading. It looks like KFC chicken, but it's steak on the inside.
Oh, that sounds
It's actually
dope.
Pretty good.
That's making me hungry and probably making the listeners hungry too. So we should
get excited.
Get back on topic. That's wild. How did you get into the whole early music thing? Because I don't know if anybody knows this who's listening, but I actually started out as a classical musician, but I ended up finding myself kind of digressing. I don't know if I kind of intentionally did it, or it was just that I was following the crowd because not a lot of people my age at the time were listening to classical music or playing classical music, so I kind of found myself away from it. But I've definitely found as I got older, more of my friends are kind of into it, and then we know each other, obviously, so I've been getting a little more into it recently as well. What made you want to stick with it throughout those times? Did you have a lot of friends who are also kind of into that realm?
I think I started really getting serious about singing when I was in high school. And I started taking voice lessons mostly because my friends were doing it. And I started really being involved in a lot of like concerts and shows and different things. And I've always enjoyed singing, like just singing in general. Growing up, I never really was exposed to much classical music. And I was just like, I just want to keep singing and I just want to keep doing the thing. I think one of the things that has helped me stick with it, because there's not as many people like our age, I can say our age, we're close enough in age, our age who are really into classical music, but I've always been pretty okay with doing my own thing and just kind of like sticking with it and saying I really enjoy this. And I think one of the things that drew me to early music is that it's just really interesting. Like there's a lot of like dissonance, and as a vocalist I get to like sing the dissonance, you know, I get to sing that like F sharp against the G chord, and like it's just like really dramatic, I guess, for a singer. It's really fun to sing, and it's really challenging music in just terms of like the counting and the ensemble and everything. So I've always kind of loved like the academic challenge of doing early music, but I think my main motivation was I was just like, I just want to keep singing. And when I was younger, I was never really exposed to a lot of like modern types of music. Like I really have only started learning about jazz like since I've been living in Boston. And I've met all these Berkeley people who are like, you should totally sing jazz. I'm like, I don't know how to do that. Yeah, because I'm just used to like looking at a page and being like, yes, how do I best like bring this music to life? Not like, how do I improvise around the melody and all that stuff? It's like, yeah.
I feel like you could definitely do jazz. Your speaking voice is very silky.
Thank you.
That's a characteristic of a lot of jazz singers. I feel like I don't hear too many jazz singers with really shrill, nasally speaking voices. They're all very creamy and nice to listen to.
It's good to know.
I think it's dope that you just kind of stuck with your guns though. Like fuck what anybody thinks about whatever. You liked classical music and early music, and that's what you stuck with, which I think is super dope. Just really quick, do you want to let everybody know what early music is? Because I remember the first time you told me what it was not what I was expecting. So everyone's about to be surprised.
So yes, on the first recording of the podcast, I explained that so early music is early like in time. So it's not music for children like a lot of people think. And it's a really like broad term that just means like early in the history of Western music. So it's in general like everything before the classical period. So if you're thinking of like really standard classical music, it's even before that. Most people agree that the end of early music was when Bach died in 1750. There's a lot of debate around it, but I kind of accept that as well. So I don't know, some composers people might know. So like Handel, he's like on the edge of early music into classical music. People probably know Bach. They know of Bach.
Oh yeah.
This is before Mozart. Who else? Like Purcell. I sing a lot of Rameau, some French music.
Classy.
Dowland, some Dowland lute songs. And now that I'm learning lute, I can play like a couple of chords at a time, along with my Dowland lute songs.
I've heard
which
it.
Is exciting.
I can attest to that.
Heard me like stumble through the many strings of the lute. Yeah.
I'm so curious what your take on is, I guess, with just the history of music in general. Like, how do you think it got to where it is today from what it was then? Because it's evolved a lot, obviously. Like, I've listened to some early songs since you've shown me, but that's even earlier than anything I've heard probably before you showed me. And if you go closer in the timeline, like I can hear similarities between jazz and like funk. So that makes sense to me, or like blues to jazz. What's your take on like the fact that it went from early to classical and then classical to whatever came next?
I think a lot of it had to do with communication issues. So like with early music, there's kind of not so much anymore, but back in the day when it was being written, there was kind of this vibe that, oh, we're just going to invite a bunch of people over and we're going to just jam, and all these people are just going to, you know, just kind of like sight read this music and we're just going to play through it. And there was kind of like that tone of like improvisation when creating early music. And then I think the later we went in time, it just became harder to communicate that, and more people were like putting on performances. And then it's like, how, as the world is expanding, do I communicate to someone, like in a different country, like this is how I want this to be done. So I think in early music, there's a lot of like really weird time signatures and things that I've had to conquer as someone who was born in the 90s and is very accustomed to 4/4. So
relatable.
Yeah, I think it's relatable for many people. And so I think in a way it got more like standardized as we went along. And now that we have, the ability to record things, it's much easier now, I think, to like send someone something and get them to kind of evoke a certain feeling or a certain like tempo or things like that. Because even sometimes when I look at like a brand new score, it's hard to know exactly what they meant, and there's a lot of debate around it. And when I look at like a piece of early music, I have to really think about the historical context, because what was fast now might not have been like fast then, or like as fast, like what they meant. So like those terms have changed over time. Yeah. So I think it's just gotten more like standardized so people can communicate to other musicians and to other people who are going to like listen to this music as to what they expect.
I think that's totally on the money. I think one of the things you said too about how as like society's changed and technology has changed, and now it's easier to just like send somebody a file and tell them to put this emotion on it. I think the same way that like a caveman doesn't have the communication skills yet, and they were still making music and they're like banging on rocks and shit, the music's gonna sound more primitive because society was more primitive, right? Yeah. And then when it got into eventually early music, it became what it was, and then from there it went to classical when they had the need to kind of write things down and perform it in front of people, and up until where it is today. So I think that's pretty interesting. I'm curious what you think like the future of early music is. Like where do you go with early music in 2018?
Ooh, that's a good question. Well, I think it's really interesting in the field of classical music, because I mean, ever since YouTube, you don't have to be like quite as good of a musician, because you can go and listen to something. And like all throughout my undergrad, my teachers were like, "Oh, you're so lucky. You can just go on YouTube and like listen to this aria. You don't even have to like, well, you still have to learn it, but you can listen to it a couple of times before you start to like really like hit the practice rooms and like learn all the notes and rhythms and everything." So I do think it's interesting that that sort of like level of spontaneity that early music has always had might change now that people like can hear immediately what it sounds like, and kind of like try to replicate that, like replicate a certain performance. And I think early music is coming back personally. So early music has always had a significantly older crowd, which is kind of interesting, because when I go to early music festivals and everything, it's kind of like I'm hanging out with all these like older aunts and uncles who are like really like knowledgeable musicians, which is kind of fun.
Yeah, it's dope.
But during the 1980s, for a lot of different reasons, like early music started to come back into fashion. So then you get a lot of people who are like me, who are like in their 20s and 30s, who are really interested in early music. So I think people who like caught that wave at the right time are starting to kind of cultivate careers out of it. And like starting to like go to school and like really like study all the different like schools of ornamentation and like all the things, all the like historical aspects of the music, and then just kind of create a career out of it. So I think it's going to stay in fashion, but it's probably going to change with technology, because I think about this all the time, that live performance, like the novelty of live performance is affected now that people can they can have instant gratification of like entertainment whenever they want. So like who's gonna leave their house to go to a concert? Like I know other musicians would, but it's like getting the average person, especially to go to a concert of music that they might not understand, who's gonna like go out.
I think it's interesting that you say that, because as a producer and like a mixing and mastering engineer, I've always found that the job is to get the recording to capture the same feel that the artist can deliver live. So
Yeah.
if I go to a show and the artist is like fucking amazing, that's an experience that I'm probably not going to get from listening to the record, because it's not the same effect. It's not the same energy that's being outputted through my speakers. And there's only so much you can do when you record something and then it gets converted into ones and zeros, and then it gets processed by other hands. It's like the telephone effect. Like you whisper something in someone's ear and then they whisper it in someone else's ear, et cetera, et cetera. And then it comes out as something totally different at the end. So I think it's interesting that you think that people don't want to come out to see it live. But I guess if you haven't been exposed to a lot of early music and you think that it might not be something that you'd be interested in, it might be hard to get that person to come initially. But then maybe if they were to go to that live performance, they might find that there's something in there that really resonates with them and that they might really like, right?
Yeah. I mean, when I see live performances now and I see people who just absolutely kill it, I mean, especially vocalists, and not just because maybe just because I'm a vocalist. I'm like a little bit biased. But I think like singing is one of the more emotional instruments you can have.
I think so, for sure.
Right? Like it's like very easy to convey different types of emotions like through yourself as the instrument. And I know that like I've been to some performances that were like mind-blowing, and I'm just sitting there like listening to this person. I just get like chills. I'm like, wow, this is amazing. And I do think if somebody goes to a performance and they experience something like that, it's going to be life-changing. Totally. And they're going to be completely affected by it. And I think there's just some people who think that they don't need, or they don't know that like going to a performance like that has that sort of potential. And that's why I think like music education is really important. You know, getting the idea across that like art can really affect you and like change your outlook on life. And so like encouraging people, especially when they're younger, to kind of just make that part of their existence, and then they can kind of recognize that sort of like emotional connection through art in other people.
Yeah, I agree 100%. Have you ever heard that quote? It's like, Earth without art is just eh.
It's just eh. Yeah, no, I think that's true.
I'm curious, like if I were to, can you even possibly like write an early music composition in 2018? Like if I sat down and said that I want to make something in that style, and let's say I did, hypothetically, would it still be classified as early music, or would it be something different? Well, what's your take on that?
I think it would probably be classified as new music, because a lot of this is a terrible way to phrase it, but new classical music. So like music that's made for like an orchestra and a choir, but is written in like the past 50 years or whatever. A lot of it is experimenting with different aspects that were like first created during like the time of early music. So there's a lot of dissonance. There's a lot of there's like polyphony. There's a lot of like moving melody lines and everything. So I think it wouldn't be like early music because it wasn't written then. So that's sorry. So that's like
I'll live.
It's a sacred time. But I think some of those trends are coming back now, which is kind of interesting. And I think now people are experimenting more with like music that it kind of makes you uncomfortable or something, with like the dissonance and everything. And that was something that early music kind of like really played on when it was first created. So
I think it's really cool that early music is the only style of music that can't be written today. Like everything that's in the genre of early music has already been done, and that's the staple of early music, and we take elements of it now, and it's kind of making that comeback in that way. But like if I were to write a jazz piece, it would still be a jazz piece. But I think that's pretty cool and unique about early music.
I think so. Well, it's just been so much time.
Yeah, true.
You know, like I don't know, like you could write something in like classical style today, but it won't be quite the same.
Right.
And I think, it is kind of weird to think about like, oh, that was just like, them writing like rap, but like in the 1800s or whatever, that was like what was happening at their time. So it was like completely normal and modern and everything. So I just think it's interesting to like see where music has gone now and like what things are cycling back. That's like super fascinating to me. Like what sorts of trends that we might have seen before and like the entire history of Western music, which ones are coming back and which ones are kind of like left and we're like, nah, we don't need that.
Right, for sure. But I'm kind of on the side that what is trendy now, well, I mean, what's trendy now is not going to be trendy later. So do you think that the next trend might be a different element, I guess, of early music or classical music that's not trendy right now? Or do you think that it's possible? I think about this sometimes too. Like, I've heard people who are musicians say that just everything's been fucking done already, which I don't think I agree with. But there's only so much you can do with 12 notes in a chromatic scale, right? So at what point has just everything been done? You know what I mean?
I don't know. I watched this YouTube video a couple of years ago. There's this guy who has a YouTube channel and it's like he just answers all these like really ridiculous questions. And
is that one of them?
One of the questions was, will we ever run out of songs?
Ooh, interesting.
Like in time. And
what does he think? He
said no. And he said that, so like statistically, if we come up with like all the combinations of notes and everything, it's like well into like the hundreds of billions, if we come up with like a certain combination. And he said, yeah, like not all of them are going to sound good, but we're probably not going to run out of songs.
Not all of them will sound good, but then also some of them will sound so similar to
some of them might sound similar.
And it's crazy to me what can be so similar that you could have even like a lawsuit over it. And that's similar enough to be classified as too similar. So like Robin Thicke and Marvin Gaye, which isn't that similar, I think. But if you look at the music from a business standpoint, that took a really big hit on Robin Thicke's career. And the Gaye family estate ended up getting a lot of money off of it, which means Robin Thicke, to have not have had that happen, would have had to write something completely different than what he created. So in that way, they've kind of trademarked a sound and taken potentially hundreds of thousands of different combinations of those 12 notes away from even being possible to write, unless you want to face that lawsuit.
Well, there's also like different like tunings and stuff. I don't know. There's many combinations. Like,
I guess we'll find out, right?
In early music, we'll find out.
So much music is made.
In early music, like everything's at 4:15, so that makes it a little bit different.
Oh no shit!
Did I talk about that last time?
I don't remember.
So
that's pretty.
So like modern music is tuned to 440, right? Like the A above middle C is tuned to 440. What is it? Vibrations of sound.
Cycles per second. Yeah.
Cycles
like
per
hertz,
second. Thank you. Cycles per second. And it's generally accepted that during the time of early music, that was actually a little bit lower. So it was 415 instead of 440, which when we perform it now, it translates to about a half step lower.
Oh, a whole half step?
Yep.
Oh, really?
Yeah, which makes a big difference for singing. Because it feels like a different song.
Yeah, definitely.
And actually, I learned recently there's some schools of thought that are like, oh, it was even lower. It was in like the 390s.
Damn.
Which is really low. So it was like closer to a whole step lower than what we would do now. And I'm like, oh my God, it's so low. I don't know.
That's wild. I just mixed and mastered an album for this artist named Kyle Bent, and he wanted to do this thing where we tune all the songs from 440 to 432. So that was like one of the last things I did. I actually did it today. Yeah. And I definitely noticed when I played them back to back, it felt, I guess, more hypnotic. I guess like very subtly a little more hypnotic, but I also don't know if that's just because I played it back to back with the 440. Like if I were to hear it for the first time, would I still have that feeling? And Childish Gambino's hit song Redbone is, I don't know if it's in 432, but it's in some weird tuning that's not really? 440. Yeah, because I tried to jam over it once and it was in between. It just didn't fucking work. It sounded terrible.
Oh god.
But that's a hypnotic song.
Yeah.
So I don't know. What do you think? Do you think that early music has a different feel because it's the standard tuning is different than what we do today?
Ooh. I don't know. I think it's hard because I move back and forth between it so much. I know it's like hard for some people who are like really musically gifted to kind of like assert themselves into the field of early music because they're just used to 440. I think most people wouldn't even notice. You know, it would just kind of go over their heads and they're like, yeah, it sounds like a melody.
Maybe you could feel it like subconsciously.
Yeah, I do think it might have like a subconscious effect. And I know people who have perfect pitch who have tried to do early music things and they're like, right? Yeah, they hate it. They're like, oh my God. Like I've met a couple singers who try to sight read at 4:15 and they're just like, what the fuck? Like I can't even do this. And I just feel really bad for them. Because it's just completely different. It's like, you know, they have like this ability and then somebody like changed the rules.
Yeah,
and
curse and a blessing,
they don't have it anymore. Yeah. Yeah. So I don't know. I think it does give it like a little bit of uniqueness, but I think for most people it would kind of go over their heads. Especially if it's all consistent, like if it's all the same throughout the concert. Or something like that. But it is something to play around with. And now I go to early music performances, both like amateur and professional, and people kind of switch. Like it's kind of a toss up whether it's going to be at 4:40 or 4:15.
Gotcha.
Most harpsichords you can just like adjust one thing,
right?
And it goes from 4:15 to 4:40, and like no problem because that's just like what we need nowadays.
That's the far right pedal on a piano too, right? Because it shifts the whole keyboard up, so it makes it slightly.
Yeah, so in harpsichords you can shift. You just shift the keyboard slightly, and that's like the thing they do. Yeah. I think the
whole topic is really interesting because we listen to tons of music at 4:40, and I don't think I've ever. I mean, at 4:40. All the music has different feels, right? So you can listen to different genres and you can listen to different songs within the genre, and each one is going to have a different feel. So I definitely think that the content of the music has more to do with the feel than the tuning it's in.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
But at the same time, I just think there's so much that we can't even begin to comprehend when it comes to our subconscious as well. So I think I definitely hear what you're saying. Maybe everybody back then just felt the exact same thing as they were listening to
because it was just all in 4:15
all the fucking time.
Probably. Yeah, I do think there is a subconscious feel, and like in general early music isn't quite as high as, at least like I can't speak to all music, but I can speak to vocal music, and the vocal music isn't as high as some like later classical music when they started to get louder instruments and
they had to
the singer, they were like, singers, be louder because our instruments are louder, you need to sing over the orchestra. So I do think there's kind of like a mysterious dramatic sort of vibe when the vocal line is just like a little bit lower. And it's interesting, it used to be like harder for me to sing when I wasn't really used to it, because despite my speaking voice, I am a high soprano. So
I was surprised as well.
I know it's very surprising for most people. So it was a little bit hard to think like, oh, I'm going to sing like lower now. I think you just have to kind of embrace it.
Hey, we'll be back in the episode in just 2 seconds, but before that, I do want to give a quick shout out to our sponsors. So for all you aspiring producers and artists out there, I can't even begin to tell you how important having a mentor was to me. I would literally not be where I am today if it wasn't for people like Mike Moss, who is a 3-time Grammy Award nominee. He got me my first credit. And Prince Charles Alexander, who's recorded Biggie and Alicia Keys. I wouldn't have been able to continue to grow and progress in my craft if it wasn't for them. So if you've been listening to the show and you heard episode 19 with Kato on the track, you know he's produced for B.O.B., Joyner Lucas, Hobson. He got token viral with his contest before anybody even knew who he was, and he totally blew up. The reason I'm telling you this is because he just opened up a mentorship program that will transition your music from being a side hustle to a career. If you want to learn the secrets from people at the top of the industry, go to bit.ly/TMJ mentor and you can try it for free. That's bit.ly/TMJ mentor. So you're an educator, which I think is really cool. Recently, I went to go see my high school band director. I hadn't seen her in like fucking forever. And she was telling me about the fact that the new principal was trying to cut the budget like pretty much in half for the arts department, and they'd been consistently cutting it since I remember I was in high school. So me as a freshman in high school, I remember it was getting cut every year up until I was a senior. And then I go back and visit maybe 6-7 years later, she's still talking about how they want to cut the budget. I guess, what do you think that high school should be doing to try to get kids more involved in music? Because I feel like if there's kids getting involved in music, then they have incentive to put more budget behind it. What's your take on that? Like, it's kind of like a chicken versus the egg situation.
Yeah, it's interesting because when I was a kid growing up in Vermont, my parents were like very hands off in terms of me being involved in stuff, which is interesting because now that I have students who are younger, I see them like doing so many things, and they're like, oh, I'm leaving this piano lesson to like go to dance, and then tomorrow I'm doing this, and tomorrow, like, and they have activities like every single day, which I think is a little bit crazy that they're so involved, but at the same time, I always feel like I really missed out by not making music part of my life sooner, like when I was younger. So I think, because I think like anyone can respond to that, anyone can respond to somebody putting out like something in the world that's like really remarkable. And I'm like personally really against those like music for like babies classes where they just like play like tambourines and stuff. I'm like, no, just take them to a concert. Yeah. Let them see like real music. You don't have to dumb it down, because they can feel what like this performance is trying to convey, because it's all just conveying, the same emotions that all humans feel. Definitely. They say if you play classical music for a baby in the womb, they come out smarter. So if they're getting that even as far as in the womb, do you not believe it? Your face. I don't know. I don't know about them being smarter. Well, first of all, for everyone listening, I don't have any scientific evidence to back this up. I just think it's kind of ridiculous. But I think there's value in learning about music and appreciating music, and I do think it's good for brain development, because I agree. Kids are trying to count, they're trying to like do coordination, they're trying to figure out all these things. Plus, like everybody needs a fucking hobby too, and yeah, they need creative outlets. They need things to do. I'm curious because I know you now, and we met pretty recently, but I feel like all your time is spent either practicing or teaching or getting coached or preparing for a recital or doing something that's music related. But you started in high school, so what were you doing, I guess, with your spare time before that? I guess I wasn't doing like social activities. So I've been, because I'm from Vermont, this is very stereotypical. I was skiing all the time.
Oh, dope.
Ever since I could walk, basically. I was on a pair of skis because my dad is really big into skiing.
Even in the summer, you were skiing?
No, it wasn't. There's a way. There you have these little like
fake snow and shit.
They're like fake skis, but they have wheels on them, so you can like train during the summer.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
That is wild.
Yeah. You think you were joking, but that's a real thing.
Have you ever heard of like indoor golf? That's a thing too. I did a jingle for a fucking interactive golf company, and and it's literally these people who can't not golf during certain seasons, so they go to places where there's like a fucking TV, and it's
let's see, what else was I doing? I was really into visual art pretty much until I got to high school, and then my focus kind of switched to music because there was just more music stuff going on. And I think if I had been exposed to more music stuff when I was younger, I would have done that, but I just didn't really have a choice. Like I always did like choir and like elementary school or whatever, but that was kind of like fake, we didn't do anything like really challenging. And then when I got to high school, and especially the teacher I had in high school, she was just like, no, you're gonna sing this, like you're gonna sing like all these Mozart arias.
Like force you to do it?
No, she didn't force me. She just like had, like, I think she had like high expectations, and I didn't know enough about that music to be like, that's really hard. So I was just like, yeah, I can do this.
Yeah.
And sure, so I just learned stuff that was like crazy difficult. And I would just work on it a lot, and I like got good at it. And then I remember like singing all these songs in the recitals we had at the end of the year, and just like afterwards, and everyone was like, you did such a good job. And I was just feeling like, whew, I was like, I've never felt so good. I've never felt so like on top of the world, like as I do when I conquer this like fucking Mozart aria, and I just feel like a boss.
Yeah, it's a really cool feeling.
Yeah.
One thing that we talk about like kind of often, not on podcasts and kind of offline, because I totally agree that when I come off a performance and people tell me that I did a really good job, it's a really cool feeling to me. It's kind of you can't really compare it to anything else. It's just kind of its own thing. But whenever I listen back to one of my performances, like there have been times where I deliver a performance and everybody comes up to me after and they're like, yeah, you killed it. And then I go back and I listen to the recording, and I've thought like what the fuck, like why do these people lie to me? Because I just cringe listening to myself. What's your take on people who are kind of in that mindset, I guess, where they hear themselves and they don't like it even though it is subjectively good?
I think you just have to stick it out, because I still do that. I'm like a working professional. I'm like teaching, and I'm like gigging, and I'm doing all the things, and I still don't like to listen to myself. And I just have to accept that I'm always going to say like more terrible things about myself than other people are going to say. And I think you just have to, if you really love the thing that you're doing, then you'll just ignore that, and you'll just tune yourself out as one of those like negative people. And I think that's part of what's made me successful as someone who's like really driven is just saying like no, like I know that this is good, and I know I've put in the work, I know I'm prepared, I know I've done this thing. And one of the things that helped me a lot with that was singing by feeling, which is something that I think a lot of singers do when they get to a certain level. They just know, like, they know what a good sound feels like. And so they just keep looking for that. And so I've been really practicing over the past couple of years, just like focusing on the feeling and not the result. Because I know whatever the result is, I'm just going to be like aiming for the next thing, or I'm going to be like, oh, that was better, but it still wasn't as good as I want to be, but I'm setting goals for myself that I can't achieve for like the next couple of years at least. So it's like really unrealistic expectations. But I think the more you pursue something, the more frustrating it can be sometimes, because you see where you want to be,
right,
and not where you are.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I think that's the only way you can improve, is by having a goal that seems unattainable at a certain point, but then you take these really small steps, and every day you get a little bit better, and you listen to the recording, you're like, that was shit, that sucked. But then the next time you're a little bit closer and you still think it wasn't very good, but eventually you get to that goal. And then when you hit that point, you make another goal. And it kind of reminds me of what we were talking about before, just the whole like earth without art is just kind of thing, because it gives kind of a sense of purpose and something to always be I guess shooting for. I've definitely found that being like a 20-something-year-old, I'm 25 now, being in my mid-20s, all the people that I grew up with who weren't musicians, I don't think I know a single one that isn't either like, oh, like I wish I could play an instrument, or like I wish I was musically talented, or I wish I was an artist, or if they were at some point, they're typically like, yeah, like I wish I didn't quit or whatever. So I think that's pretty important.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think it has a lot to do with the way our society is right now. It just like prizes people who are the most exceptional. You know, like nobody's gonna watch like an okay American Idol audition, even if singing like makes that person feel completely complete. Like everyone just prizes like the most talented. But I think everyone can benefit from having some sort of creative outlet. It doesn't even have to be like music or art. It could be like, you know, like figure skating or something. Like everyone can benefit from doing that thing that just brings them joy. And I think one of the things that I've had to come to terms with as someone who decided to pursue the thing that brings me joy is to set realistic expectations for that. So I know that, you know, like singing it's super variable. Like some days I'll wake up and I'll be like kind of tired and I just won't sound like as good that day. And I'm just kind of like, okay, that's just a normal day. You know, I try not to like carry that with me. And I try not to set unrealistic expectations for myself, especially now that I've chosen to make it a focus of my career. And I try to not put so much pressure on how I perform on a particular day or for a particular audition or something like that, because I still want to be able to find that joy in doing it. And I think that's really important. Yeah,
for sure. I would even take it a step farther and say I think it's essential for somebody to have some sort of creative outlet, because we all experience emotions and we all have things happen to us. And if you don't do something with it, then it just gets bottled up, and then who knows what happens after that. So yeah, agreed, definitely. Unfortunately, it's our time. There's one question I ask on every episode, and I guess you've answered it already.
I don't remember what I said.
Well, you get
I get to answer it again.
You get to let everybody know, if you had unlimited money, no strings attached, what would you do and why?
Ooh, I think I would pay off my student loan debt first, because, you know, millennial
You can
problems.
pay mine too if you want.
Yep, I would pay yours. I would pay like most close friends debt. I think I would start a couple different organizations that would really encourage young people to be involved in, if not classical music, then just like music in general. I think it's super important. I would also like to put on more performances that do experimental things with early music, because I think that would be important in ensuring that it continues on and has kind of like a fresh appeal to audiences, as kind of doing like creative performance, so like multimedia and like interactive performance and different things like that. So that's like a pipe dream I've had for a little while, that I still want to find a way to bring to fruition. someday. So yeah, I would probably do that.
Dope. I know you have a couple recitals coming up, and you have a Facebook page that you recently created and an Instagram account. If you want to just let everyone know where they can find you, feel free to drop that.
Sure. So the recitals are coming up very soon. I'm doing my first recital series. It's a benefit recital to fund my graduate auditions in historical performance, so I can start my career in early music. And there's going to be 2 recitals in the Boston area. So the first one is at the Green Room in Somerville. It's going to be October 27th, which is a Saturday at 7 p.m. And the second one is November 3rd, which is the following Saturday, at All Saints Parish in Brookline. And it's going to be a great program. I made it myself. There's going to be some Purcell, some Dowland. Everybody loves Dowland. If you don't believe me, just show up. You'll love it. There's going to be some Bach, some Rameau. I'm going to do a Strozzi cantata, which is like a 10-minute, like massive vocal work, very dramatic. There's going to be some Handel. Yeah, something for everyone. And then I recently created my Facebook page as a professional musician, and that is Kendra Comstock Music on Facebook. So feel free to check that out for all the latest updates on what I'm doing.
Awesome. Yeah, if you're in Vermont or in the Boston area, highly recommend checking out those shows. And Kendra, thanks for being on the show.
Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of The Music Journal. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you got a lot out of it. If you want to know more about me and what I do, I just put out a personal EP on Spotify. You can go to bit.ly/Wes Yee Spotify. And if you want to know more about music production, I teach an online course about it too. Just shoot an email to wes@homestudiohits.com and I'll send you an application. Just for filling out the application, I'll send you a free sample pack of sounds I use to make the instrumental you're listening to and more. All these links will be available in the show notes, so you can check them out there. And while you're there, if you feel inclined to rate this show 5 stars, that would really help me out. Other than that, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss an episode. Thanks again. Peace.